All right. Well, does anyone remember our memory verse that we've been working on? John 14:15. If you love me, keep my commands, right? You guys nailed it. Every single one of you nailed it. If you love me, keep my commands. We've been going through this series in this Sermon on the Mount, right? We've been talking about the Sermon on the Mount from Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, and we are now getting into chapter 6 and a good ways into chapter 6, and I'm excited about this one because we are, we're getting to some of where things really hit the road, like the rubber meets the road. We're going to actually talk about money and possessions today, right? So in the past, we've talked about Jesus set out the Beatitudes at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. They were the foundational principles of this whole teaching that he's setting up, this whole kingdom that he's now going to be setting up. Those are the foundational principles. And then he also said that you have a role to play. You are the salt of the earth, right? You are the light of the world. And then he gave us several of these relational rules, right? How to interact with each other. What are the ways that we can love each other? What are the ways that we should be treating each other, even if it is counter to what our natural being would want to do, right? This is a life in reverse. That's what we've been talking about over the last many weeks. And last week we talked about the idea of hypocrisy. Right? If what you're doing doesn't align with what you believe, then you are a hypocrite, right? And we've talked about how every one of us has done this, right? I shared some embarrassing stories about myself. I'm not going to reiterate those. If you missed them, you got to go check out YouTube. But of how I realized that there were some issues in my life as well. And so, but I'm gonna do another little confession time here. I have been discovering that I have a bit of a problem, okay? And some of you, everyone's like, oh, let's hear it, eh? Everyone leans in. I love that. Some of you may have a similar type of problem, and I've been dealing with this. It's been revealed to me that I have a bit of a problem in this area. And, there's, I know someone in this room, his name is Jason, has a similar problem, okay? And but what I have discovered is that if I go in to a place like Uncle Wiener's or Treasure Hunt or Princess Auto, yeah, can I get an amen, Brandon? Yeah. And yeah, like I have a problem. I go into a place like that and I'm like, I know how much that is at Canadian Tire or at Home Depot or something, and so I must get this deal. It's like it's not going to last the day, I'm sure, right? I was actually trying to find another rain barrel to put in my backyard, and I went all over town looking for this rain barrel, and eventually I found I should have gone to Princess Auto at the beginning because they had these huge rain barrels that were like $25, and it was like, oh, made me so happy. But the problem is that I can't go through Princess Auto without going around every row. If you've been up to Uncle Wiener's, this is a new discovery in my life, and it's becoming a problem for me because I am like every other guy that goes through those every one of those aisles. You show up there. No, I don't know if anybody goes to Uncle Wiener's with an intention to buy something specific. They just go in there, and there's usually like 20 guys. And there's ladies in there too, but the guys for sure, they just walk down one aisle and slowly down the next, right? It's the slowest shopping experience you could possibly have because you don't know what you're looking for, but you'll know it when you see it, right? It's like, I don't know, I had no idea that I needed that solar light for my fence. Like I just, obviously now I absolutely need it. We have these enticing things that are there, and especially when they're super cheap, it's like I just can't help myself sometimes. I had a wheelbarrow at home, kind of an old fixed wheel one, and I went to Uncle Wiener's, and there was a nice big aluminum wheelbarrow with a nice big inflatable tire. I was like, I know I have one at home, but this one I really need. So now I have 2 wheelbarrows that don't get used. So it's one of those things that happens, right? We have this desire to have these things, right? And so I'm storing up these treasures, and now I'm like, man, I need another shed. is what my new addiction is now. I'm like, I need to figure out how to have more storage space. Now, what's interesting is I was seeing some stats this week that there has never been a time in history where, especially in North America, where people pay so much just to store things, right? There's entire sectors of industry, commercial storage units, right? You know, and sometimes if you're selling a house and you're working towards building one, like Terry and Fran, there's going to be things in storage, right? But for most people, they're just like, I don't want to get rid of that, but I don't have room in my place, you know. And so there's these storage units. And when we were in Victoria, people have small little homes because it's so expensive to live there. And so they have these massive storage yards. There was one that was built while we were there. It's like a 3-level storage yard. It's like this. It's a massive warehouse. And people spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month just to store things. Right? We have this desire to collect things, and I am no better, right? I know when we had some of the board over and our team over there last week, I got, Jason wasn't happy that I was cutting in on his treasure hunt moment, right? That's what you do that Saturday morning. Does anybody like to do garage sailing or Facebook Marketplace? Like, man, that's a problem for me too, right? We have this problem. These storing treasures here on earth, right? But so the question is, where are we going to store things, and what is it that we can be storing in heaven? So we're gonna open up our Bibles here in Matthew chapter 6, and we're going to see what Jesus has to say about this. Matthew chapter 6, verse 19. I'm just going to do a couple of verses here, 19 to 21. All right. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So what's your focus? What is your focus? What are we putting our eyes on? What are we concentrating on? You know, and I was thinking as like a sniper would be on in a military battle. He's looking out at the battlefield looking for targets, right? He's focusing on those types of things. He's looking to select a target. So my question for us, what is your target? What is your target? Is it temporary treasures? Is it having 2 wheelbarrows? Is that next vehicle or whatever it might be? Or is it going to be on those eternal treasures, right? Now, this passage talks about moth, and in the NIV it talks about vermin, okay? Most other translations actually say rust, okay? Moth and rust, right? But the idea here, in a literal sense, what Jesus was saying was that he was talking about moths and how those bugs end up destroying your clothes. Okay, they weren't made in such a way that like they are now, where bugs don't really get in there and eat them, right? Now, does anybody remember mothballs in your closet or your grandma's closet or something like that? You remember that smell? Just saying that, that smell comes back to you of mothballs, right? And the idea there, and I was looking into this week as I was preparing. What mothballs actually are, I didn't know this before, is actually it's a toxic gas that it off-gasses into your closet that kills or repels bugs, right? And so when you go into that closet and you spread out all those clothes and that wafting of mothballs, you know, in some ways it's like there's some like a reminiscing of grandma or something like that. But in other ways it's like, it's not good for you. It's toxic gas. Okay, so let's not be, focusing on smelling too many mothballs. But our kids these days would have no idea what that is, right? People don't use mothballs anymore. But this idea here is when Jesus is saying you need to store up treasures that are not going to be destroyed, right? But everything that we do that is physical here will get destroyed. Okay, this Greek word that that the NIV interprets vermin, where other translations say rust, it's called brosis. Okay, in Greek. Okay, brosis. Okay. Did you catch that, bro? No? Okay. Brosis. Eating away or eating up is what that means. Okay, so the Greek reader, when he's hearing Jesus say this, right, the listener to what Jesus is saying, he understands that it's talking about moths and bugs and things that destroy, right? But what's interesting is that as the Bible has been translated, it doesn't really translate as well in terms of that idiom, right? Because we have a closer understanding of what rust does, and it is the same idea. And so that's rust, degrades metal, and it causes it to be destroyed and lose value and things like that. And so that's why most of our Bibles interpret it and translate it that way, right? And what's interesting is I found that on the island, so we bought 2 vehicles on the island. We have the 2 vehicles we have now we purchased on the island, and we ended up realizing that vehicles don't really rust there very quickly. Sometimes I've heard people, from other parts of Canada, they think that the vehicles that rust are the ones that are from the island. But you'd be surprised how rarely you actually drive through the ocean when you're living on the island. And so vehicles actually don't rust on the island because they're not salting the roads all the time. But when you come up here, it was one of the first things I realized after living on the island for a couple of years, is that we came up here and vehicles that were, that would otherwise look brand new on the island are rusting into the ground here. Work trucks and things like that, where they're 5 years old and the rust is already coming through, right? And so this is something that is very familiar to us, this idea of rusting of vehicles, right? And so there's treasures of this world that we spend all this money on. You can spend, $100,000 on a vehicle that in 5 or 10 years is going to be just riddled with rust and not really be worth a whole lot. Right? There's a lot of people. My father-in-law is a body man, and so he has been hired by a couple of guys to actually to do a bunch of body work on a 10 or 15-year-old truck, because it is cheaper to spend $20,000 repairing the body work on a vehicle than to go out and buy another vehicle, right? And at least they know the vehicle, that they're familiar with. And so these things, it just is a constant degrading of what happens, of those physical things. The treasures of this world do not last, right? They provide temporary pleasure, right? Everybody knows that new car smell, right? And so there's this pleasure driving that thing off the lot. But then a short while later, you realize you got into the vehicle, drove around, and then forgot that it was a brand new vehicle, and because it was just a functional thing for you, right? It became functional. Right? And so it goes from temporary pleasure to functional, and then before too long, you're replacing, especially in this city, you're replacing sway bar links and you're replacing struts, and you're realizing that this vehicle all of a sudden is now a liability. You've gone from temporary pleasure, right, to kind of functional, to now it's a liability, right? And I've kind of come to the conclusion that in this city with my little Mazda, that I will be replacing running gear on my car probably every year, and I've just made my peace with that. Okay, but that's part of it, right? It becomes a liability. There's a book that I listened to recently. I haven't finished it yet because it's a slow listen, but it's called The Return of the God Hypothesis, and it's written by a guy who is a geophysicist with a doctorate in the philosophy of science. Okay, it's nice, easy reading, right? But he talks about how the idea of Darwinian evolution is now falling apart because we've realized that the idea of evolution relies upon the fact that things mutate and become better before they degrade and are destroyed. But when we look at all of the science around this, we're realizing that things they will degrade far quicker than they productively mutate. Okay, and so it doesn't make any sense. It's like trying to build a house of cards by throwing cards at a table, right? Is there some chance it's going to land right? Maybe, right? But it's much more likely that it's going to knock the last card down every time you throw one, right? That's what evolution actually is, and that's how they're realizing these things. And so then they're trying to explain these in different ways. But there's a far more people nowadays that are becoming more interested in the idea of a creator. even if they're not interested in the religious side of things, but the idea of a creator, coming to create everything, because things will actually degrade far faster than they improve on their own without an external intelligence at play. There's when we look at how things are made, it is clearly engineered, it's clearly designed, right? And so without the Lord, it just degrades. Physical things just degrade, right? It takes great effort and investment to maintain just a state of repair on whether it's your vehicle or your lawn, right? Like I mentioned that I put out a bunch of seed and some fertilizer on my lawn, and now every day I go out there and I'm like, are you growing yet? Are you growing yet? And then I said to Caitlin, hey, I saw one. There's one that's growing right there. And it makes me so happy, right? But it takes so much effort, right? And now I'm watering my lawn. And this is one of the things that I thought to myself before. I was like, I'm so cheap. I don't want to spend the money on watering the lawn. But now I'm like, I want a good yard. So I got to mow and water my yard. And so now I'm just going to pay the money for the water because now I am going to have a good yard. But it takes investment. Things degrade, right? And dandelions are just like, and so somebody this week put me on to a new chemical that I'm going to give a try to, because I'm like, we're going to go nuclear on these things. And I'm not going to be the one island of dandelions between my two neighbors that have perfect lawns, right? I'm like, I got to catch up, and I'm going to need some assistance. So I'm just owning that, right? But there's things degrade, right? Vehicles rust, paint peels, sidewalks crack, right? When you have, I don't know if anyone have been here, but I know my neighbor, he spent, I don't know what it was, $15,000, $20,000 on a brand new concrete driveway, right? And wouldn't you know, it's cracked already, right? It happens. Things degrade. Things fall apart, right? Now, earlier this week, I took my daughter to the dump, which I always felt when I was a kid, I loved going to the dump. It was like a special time with Dad to go to the dump. None of my kids enjoy it for some reason now, but partly because the dump here, it has a very strong smell to it, right? And so I was like preparing Emma when we were going. He's like, it's going to be pretty stinky. And he's like, oh no. But there's literally a mountain of garbage, right? And so she sees this. She sees this mountain of garbage and all the seagulls gleefully enjoying it, right? And the big tractors pushing the garbage. And she says to me, isn't that not good for the environment? Like she's made a connection there, right? And they hear these things in their TV they watch at school talking about the environment. But it kind of came home, and I said, yeah, it just gets buried. She's like, what? That just gets buried and just, because the things of this world just degrade and lose their value, right? And so what is Jesus telling us? Jesus is reminding us that we need to focus on the eternal, not the temporary. Jesus is reminding us that if we've learned this lesson, what's the next step? If we are now going to say, okay, I'm going to try and buy fewer things at Uncle Wiener's and at Princess Auto, that's a hard thing for me to commit to, I got to say. But if I realize that I need to maybe put my efforts and my energy, my resources towards the things of God's kingdom, instead of just gathering another, a second or third wheelbarrow, then what does that mean? It means that I need to change my focus. I need to focus on this new goal. Now, what's the next obstacle then? So what Jesus actually says next is he's teaching us what the next obstacle is to keeping our eyes on this new goal of focusing on heavenly treasure. Okay, so let's pick it up in Matthew 6:22. And we'll read through to 24. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. You cannot serve both God and money. So it's kind of strange here. So Jesus kind of switches gears here, right? He's using one metaphor, and then he's talking about treasures of heaven, treasures of the earth, moths and rust and vermin, right? And then he entirely switches his metaphor here, and he's starting to talk about the eye, right? He's talking about clarity of vision, right? So is he changing topics? And I would say no. He's identifying what's necessary for you to focus on the eternal and not the temporary. Right? I mentioned like a sniper, but if you have a rifle scope, I thought about bringing a rifle scope today. But if you have a rifle scope and it is dirty, right? My rifle has these lens protectors on the ends, and they're like a yellow plastic that sits on each end of my rifle scope. And if I try to look down that, it is not a clear vision, right? Because it's not really designed to be used that way. It's just a protector, right? And so if your scope is dirty, you're going to look down that scope and you're not going to be able to find your target, right? It's just going to be blurry, right? If there's a something that is obstructing the vision, I'm not going to be able to find my target. And you need to have clarity of vision to hit your target. Clarity of vision defines how effectively you actually reach your goal, right? If you're a farmer and before the age of all these GPS tractors that are out there now, I remember when I was a kid, I'd be out there and if I was cutting hay or cultivating, you couldn't keep a straight line if you were looking around here and there. You had to keep your eye, and on these tractors, they had these like a little triangle on the front of my dad's 4030 John Deere tractor. A little triangle at the very front of the hood, and you had to keep that little triangle straight at that one fence post that you were heading towards, right? And then you would kind of count over a few fence posts the next pass to make sure that you were going to head straight there. You have to have clarity of vision to be able to see that. If my windshield on the tractor was all dirty, I would never be able to keep my eye on that one fence post on the other end of the field. We need clarity of vision, right? Jesus identifies that you need to have clarity in your vision in order to put your new goal into practice. So what are the things that then prevent us? What are the things that actually cloud our vision if we are trying to put this new goal to have treasures in heaven into practice? Well, there's things that the Bible talks about. It talks about sins, hurts, even pleasures, distractions. Right? Hebrews 12:1 says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles us, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." Let us cast aside the hindrances. So what is a hindrance? If you're running a race, right? Are you gonna? You don't see very many long distance runners running in winter boots, right? That would not really go well for them. They are far too heavy. If you buy really expensive shoes for running or things like that, not that I have, I gotta say, but they are very light, right? There's barely any weight to them, right? If you have things that are weighing you down, you're not going to run with perseverance. So the writer of Hebrews here is saying, let us then throw off everything that hinders, right? Sometimes these are good things in our life that are not the right things, right? There's nothing morally wrong about having a wheelbarrow, right? But if I develop an obsession with getting every single type of wheelbarrow that's out there, right? That could lead me down a very expensive pathway, right? I'm going to be the wheelbarrow guy, right? But it would. So there's nothing wrong with a wheelbarrow, but it would not be the right thing, right? And I think that in our lives, there's these things in our lives a lot of the time that are that are good things on their own, but they're not the right things. We get distracted by the things of this world, right? And they're not the right things. If I spent all my time trying to get my lawn just perfect, right? And ignored everything else in life, My family would fall apart, right? The church would be injured by that, ignoring it as well, right? So it's nothing specifically wrong, right? It might be nice, it might be good to have a good lawn, but it is not the right thing. So what are the things in your life that are good things that are not the right things, right? But then this writer of Hebrews also talks about the sins that easily entangle us, right? Whether those are addictions or vices, or maybe it's laziness in our lifestyle, or laziness in our relationships, laziness with our Bible reading or exercise or our prayer time. These are the things, these things that can entangle us and prevent us from moving forward and having clarity of vision to see this new goal of working towards storing our treasures in heaven and not on earth. So let's not let the hindrances and sin to cloud our vision. We need to have the clarity of vision for focusing on the eternal instead of the temporary. At the end of the day, we understand that planning for the future is a good thing, right? If you're, saving for a holiday, right? Then maybe that's going to affect your day-to-day life. You're not going to maybe go out for coffee as much or go out to eat as much if you're putting some money towards a holiday, right? Makes sense. It's good, right? So how much more important is it then to invest in eternal treasures? We understand saving for a holiday. We understand saving for that new house. We understand saving for our retirement. But are we focusing and prioritizing things in our life that actually store treasures in heaven, that is eternal and far more long-lasting than anything that we can gather in this world? How much more important? Luke 12, verse 13, Jesus tells another story here in response to a question that is posed to him. It says, someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist of an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man, yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich toward God." There's this great warning that Jesus is giving us, that if we focus on the things of this earth, if we focus on the ambitions of getting the next thing, and we ignore our relationship with God, there will come a day when we're going to realize that all of that will pass away and we will be poor towards God. He's saying, be rich towards God instead of being rich on this earth, right? Now, it's not wrong to have these nice things, right? The life that Jesus is calling us to does not just require us to sell all of our stuff, give it all to the poor, okay? But it's a life of generosity that actually stores treasures in heaven instead of here. Now, does all this mean that your physical needs don't matter at all? Well, no. Last week we learned that Jesus was telling us about prayer, right? And he encourages us in the Lord's Prayer to ask God for our physical needs. Okay, so it's not that the physical is wrong or evil or anything like that. It's a matter of priority, and it's a matter of trusting our provider, right? If we don't trust our provider, we're going to make sure that we gather it all ourselves, right? We're going to make sure that we take control of the situation, right? There's in World War II, particularly in the war in North Africa, the battles went back and forth, And the lines of engagement went back and forth across North Africa. And it became so clear that supply lines were going to define the outcome of the war. Supply lines across hundreds and hundreds of kilometers of desert defined the outcome of these battles. And whoever had the best supply lines actually were able to conquer the enemy. And it's these supply lines that they had to trust, right? When a force was going out into the desert, they had to be able to trust their supply lines, right? And because if they didn't get resupplied with water, with fuel, with ammunition, all that stuff, they were toast. There was no way of surviving. They had to trust their supply lines. They had to trust the ones that were providing their support. So trusting our provider is a critical piece to be able to move forward in the kingdom. Right? Imagine, here's a question. It's a bit of a challenge for us. Imagine if you could 100% trust God's provision. How would your life be different? If you could 100% trust him, how much fear would you have? If you could trust him 100%, and he is trustworthy, if you actually trusted him 100%, how would your life be different? I can tell you my life would be different. I would have way more courage. I would have way more peace, way more strength, right? He's calling us to trust him. Jesus is commanding us to trust his Father's provision. Our Father's supply lines never fail. Sometimes we think we need something, and he says, no, you don't need that. That is a want, right? You don't need 2 wheelbarrows. I'm going to be giving away a free wheelbarrow by the end of this as my part of my repentance. You know, there you go. God will provide our needs, right? Jesus encouraged us to ask God for the daily bread, right? Now, bread is a pretty basic food, isn't it? Right? He provided the needs for Israel with manna for all of those years. But they got so dissatisfied with the manna. Even though it was like a nice, light bread that tasted like honey. Like, that sounds good to me, right? But they got bored of it. And they became dissatisfied with it. And we do as well sometimes. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your paths straight. Trust him with everything. Right? And what was those last couple of verses we read in that passage in Matthew 6? It says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well. Therefore, do not worry about tomorrow. For tomorrow will worry about itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. Each day has enough trouble. We can get so closed in and focused on the things that are temporary and lose sight of the treasures in heaven. And like I said to the kids, the treasures in heaven are the things when we bring hope into somebody's life, right? When we provide that glimmer of hope, of prayer or support for somebody, that's storing treasures in heaven. When we're bringing truth into the world, when there's something out there that someone's believing a lie in your life, and you bring in truth, when you open up the Bible and you bring truth in there, that is storing up treasures in heaven. When you're bringing kindness, kindness into a situation where someone has not experienced kindness, you're storing treasures in heaven. When you bring the good news, when you bring the good news into the world, that's what Jesus is calling us to do. Bring good news into the world. What's this last one? Love. When you bring love into the world, you're storing treasures in heaven. When you focus on these things instead of the things of this world, we're storing treasures in heaven. So I want to close with a couple of questions. What area of my life am I grasping so tightly to that I need to just trust God in? Is there an area of your life that you're just finding it impossible to trust him in? God's calling you to let him take control of it. He's calling you to let him take it on. Trust his supply lines. And the second question is, what decision have I been avoiding because I'm afraid to trust God? What action am I afraid to step into because I'm afraid to trust God? Let's pray. God, we thank you that you are in control. You look down on our silly little lives sometimes and think, if only you trusted me. You're running around trying to fix everything. If only you just trusted me. So I've got it in my hand. God, help us to trust you. Help us to see the value of the treasures in heaven that we need to store instead of the things on earth. Help us to trust you, Lord. God, give us the faith to step into these actions that we have been too afraid to step into. Give us boldness, give us faith, give us trust in your supply lines, God.